is Jamie Reichschlager, and today I have the first part of a two-part series where we're talking to Marissa Anderson. And Marissa has a story that is almost unbelievable. And I wanted to put this episode out there, part one. I wasn't planning on it this way, but it worked out that her first episode is coming out right around Halloween. And this, although it is called the Triumphant Birth Podcast, and I promise you there is a triumphant ending to her story, this first part is more of the horror of what she had to go through in order to get to her triumph. So the story that you're about to hear is one of a medical issue turned into medical kidnapping, turned into a national news story. And so this is one that if you are in a place where maybe you are pregnant or about to get pregnant and just trying to protect your peace, if you are just about to have your baby and you are putting yourself in a bubble, energetically, this is something that you may want to skip over. And I give you a chance to do that within the episode as well. If you are listening, I would encourage you to take some deep breaths, pause when you need to. And I do think it's important to listen to this story, though, because there is a happy ending that you will get to listen to next week. So without further ado, here is my guest, Marissa Anderson. Welcome to the Triumphant Birth Podcast. I'm Jamie Reichschlager, and today we have Marissa Anderson. Marissa is just an incredible guest, and I'm so happy to have her on because, you guys, she is 2 weeks out from a C-section. And I was just telling her, had I known that she was only 2 weeks out, I would not have even offered her this recording date. So I am super, super grateful that you're here, Marissa. And I'll go ahead and read part of the introduction that you sent. And then if there's anything else you'd like to add, feel free to do that. So Marissa Anderson was raised in a Christian homeschool family. She married the love of her life as a couple weeks after her 19th birthday and had her son, baby Cyrus, at 20 years old. They had a medical kidnapping case, which we'll talk about today. And that was when Cyrus was 10 months old. She later became a birth doula, and she's working on becoming a childbirth educator as well. And then from there, you got pregnant with twins, and those are the babies that you just had 2 weeks ago. So I'm just floored that you're here with us today, Marissa. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
I think that kind of sums it up, my story basically. But yeah, let's see here. I got married at 19. I got pregnant almost a year later with our first, Cyrus. We were so happy. We prayed for him for many months. And I was kind of raised in a more holistic home, but still being young and not having any kids yet. I wasn't very educated in all of it, but with the pregnancy, I just did a deep dive into all the research I could do on natural birth and just trying to figure out the best way to do things for my first. So I decided to give birth in a birthing center. It was a really good experience. I had a nurse midwife and a student midwife. I went into labor at almost 39 weeks. My water broke. And it was a really good birth, actually, for the first time. I remember being scared in the beginning when the contractions first hit because I had never experienced that before, and it was very intense. But from everything, all my research I had done and my breathing practices, once I realized that nothing was wrong and this was a very normal part of labor, then I started like breathing through it. So as it got more difficult, I got more control in my mind, which made it, I guess you could say, easier. Um, and he shot right out after I got out of the burning tub, to try to go to the bathroom. He just shot right out on the floor, and
Oh my.
it was really, really good, really uneventful. He was 7.5 pounds, and it was just a really good experience. I remember saying afterwards to the midwives, "I want to try that again," and they're like, "What is wrong with you?" But just after experiencing it once, I was like, "I want to see how I do after I've had the experience now." So it was a really, really good birth, and yeah, I'm very happy with it.
Amazing. So what led you down the path of, going to the birth center? Now, was it a freestanding birth center or one that was associated with the hospital?
It was freestanding.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what
So,
led you down that path?
well, it was because this is 2021. He was born May of 2021.
Okay.
So this was during COVID, after all the lockdowns had happened. And I did not have any plans of going into the hospital. There were, in our local area, there was just a lot of horror stories about the hospital. And that was definitely something I wanted to avoid. So that was the main cause of it.
Yeah. I asked that question because so many moms say, even if they are more naturally minded, they want to try a physiological or unmedicated birth for their first. They say, "Well, I'll see how it goes in the hospital first." They kind of
Yeah.
are, funneled into that approach because everybody else does it, and then they'll think, "Well, we'll see how it goes, and then maybe for the second one, I'll try for a home birth or a birth center birth." So that's really cool. That's really interesting. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
How did your pregnancy go?
So the pregnancy was actually it was also really good, uneventful. I tried to maintain movement and had really good nutrition. I went to a naturopathic doctor. He was a family friend of ours and worked with all of us. So I went to him, did some supplementation, and it was really good. Towards the end, maybe like after 35 weeks or so, I did start getting some swelling. I couldn't really tell it hadn't been in my face yet, but like I just had more weight gain towards the end. And then maybe the 3 days before birth, then I started like really swelling, like in my feet and face and
Mhm.
everywhere. So that was pretty much the only thing. And Cyrus had a two vessel cord. Um, he also had a tongue tie, and let's see here. Yeah, I think that was pretty much it. But other than that, it was really good.
So was the two vessel cord diagnosed? Like, did they notice after he came out, or was that detected on ultrasound?
Yeah, that was at the anatomy scan. I remember actually they called me after they found that, and the midwife, it was the student midwife, so she was talking to me about it. I had no idea what that was, and I think she was pretty new to it too, because the phone call went something like, she was just saying that she recommended further testing because it could mean various things, including like Down syndrome or some sort of genetic defect. So I didn't know anything about it, and I was a little bit worried, but I declined any further testing. And because I told her, I was like, I mean, if we test and find anything out, there's nothing we could do to change anything at this point. So I don't see any reason to test. So I, prayed about it. I felt a lot of faith, and I was just very, very uh, very unbothered by it. And we went through with our baby shower, and I just felt confident that no matter what happened, it was going to be okay. And I've later learned now with the two vessel cords, it's really very rarely an issue.
That is such wisdom, and I wanna commend you for as a first-time mom, and you're young at this point.
Well,
You're
yeah, it
still
was.
you're still young. You're 20 at this point, right? 19 or
Yeah.
20?
Yes.
And so knowing that, okay, and that's just common sense, right? Like, okay, I'm getting this test done. And I want our listeners to hear this. I'm getting this test done. Think about what you're going to do with the results. Like, when you get the test back, this is a possibility to hear, and this is a possibility to hear. How are your actions going to change based on what the results say? And so, a lot of times, it's nothing. And this is the wisdom that, from what I understand, was taught early in when doctors went through medical school like decades ago. This is actually the wisdom that they were taught. And now it's, uh, it's testing for whether it's financial gain, whether it's whatever else, which may not have been your case, but I just know that in general, um, in the medical model, it's let's investigate every single thing that we can because the value is in just having the information versus, okay, what are we actually going to do about it? So I just wanted to pause there because it's not something that I hear a lot in moms who are so young and especially with their first birth.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So okay, so you have the anatomy scan, you talk through the two vessel cord, you decide that, well, you're unbothered by it, so you decide to do nothing. Was there anything else that was remarkable about the pregnancy? Anything else of note?
There wasn't, I think going back in time with the knowledge I have now, I might have seen a few things that were off, but um, it's at the time everything just seemed like it was going really well. And with my prenatal care, um, everything was really good. Blood pressure, yeah, all of it. It was
Sure.
pretty uneventful.
And at the birth center, did they offer? I'm sure they offered, but did you do the like the diabetes screening, the gestational diabetes screening, the GBS test, all of that stuff?
So I skipped all of that. I skipped. I think I might have done the GBS. Um, I can't remember. There was one thing I did, but pretty much everything that I could deny, I did. Um, that was just kind of the energy I went in with. Like, it's not necessary. Let's not do it. So the birth center was really good at working with me. They really didn't give me any issue with that.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's a testament to your intuition about that because I know that there are some, sometimes that is the energy that's there of like, this is just straightforward. I know as a mother, nothing's wrong. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's like, well, you're just going along. Everybody thinks things are okay. And you're like, actually,
Yeah,
something feels off. Let's
right.
take care of that. Let's check that out. Okay. So, really a great pregnancy. And then you said your water broke at 39 weeks.
Yeah, almost just a couple days shy of 39 weeks.
Okay. And how long did it take for contractions to kick in?
Okay, so my water broke. I think it was around 3:30 or 4 a.m. And then by maybe 5 or 6 is when the contractions started. And I tried to wait a little bit before waking up my husband. I was hoping I could labor like a little bit longer and let him sleep. But then they started getting really intense really fast. So I woke him up. He was doing some hip squeezes. And then he also had me in the shower too with the warm water, which really helped. But we called the midwives, and I guess they couldn't really do the birth without the nurse midwife there,
Okay.
who lived a couple hours away. But the student midwife met us there maybe like an hour later. And when I got to the birth center, she did a cervical check, which was very painful. But she did a cervical check and said that I was only 4 centimeters dilated, and that I should go home and labor at home because it's just easier to do that, and they don't admit anyone to the birth center until at least 6 centimeters in active labor. So I remember thinking, "Oh my goodness, like this, it gets more intense, and it's like I'm only 4 centimeters, and I mean this is happening." But she was basically saying like it could be a really long time because you're a first time mom, like it could be 12 plus hours. So I was just like, there's no way, like it's gonna be faster than that. So we go home and maybe like an hour or so later, I'm starting to actually push. Like I feel pushy.
An
And
hour later.
yeah. And
Oof.
it took some time after that, but um yeah, so I was in the bath and my husband had the hot water on me and I was feeling like the urge to push, but not very strongly yet. Just, towards the end of the contractions when it kind of starts feeling that way. So I told my husband, he called the midwives and they're telling him on the phone, no, don't let her push because it could swell her cervix or something like that because they didn't really think I was dilated much more. So I'm trying not to push, but I'm like, I can't control it. It's just happening. So they had us go back in and we had to at the time we lived in an apartment that was 4 stories high and with no elevator. So I had to trek down the stairs again. And we drove back to the birth center. I can't remember what time we got there, maybe around 9 in the morning. And they had the bath running for me. So I got in the bath and I labored for, it felt like a long time, but I ended up giving birth at like 11:20. So I think the labor was around 6 hours. But yeah, they were shocked with how fast he moved down, how quickly things went, for it being my first time.
So I want to pause there because this is something that we hear a lot that, I always say, so your cervix is not a crystal ball. It doesn't tell you where you're going. It tells you where you are
Yeah.
right now. And so, yes, there's a general trajectory that birth workers can say, okay, yes, especially for a first time mom. Um, Normally it does take longer than that. However, we do know that sometimes going from 4 to 10 can take a lot less time than people than average. Um, so that's really important to know just for
Yeah.
everybody that's listening and yeah, so that's all I'll say about that. But okay, so you have your baby. What was that like for you? Did you catch your own baby? Did they catch him for you?
Yeah, so it was crazy. I think towards the end when I was pushing, there's just that forceful feeling. I kind of explain it like when you throw up and you just can't control it, but the opposite way. And it's like my older sister who just recently gave birth, she said it feels like negative G's on your face. It's just like
Oh,
pulling it down. There's just so much pressure downwards. But I think at that point it got almost like easier. The ring of fire and all of that, it just seemed less intense than the the contractions part. So yeah, he when he came out, actually, I was going to the bathroom and I was coming back from the bathroom to get into the tub, but I was just like pushing harder and harder and started like bearing down. So I just stopped right there, and I think one of the midwives like slipped a birth stool under me, and I was just like pushing so hard, and then on the one contraction, I his head was out, but I didn't want to wait for the next contraction, so I just like added more push to
oh,
it. Just silently like holding my breath, just completely pushed him out, and he twisted out so fast that he almost hit the ground.
oh,
And the midwife caught him. The student midwife did, but she immediately put him on my chest, and I did skin to skin. I think he latched pretty quickly too. And then the midwife did the whole fishing thing with the placenta, which I didn't even know that that was a thing. Now I know, and I wouldn't have them do that. But yeah, she had me cough, and she was like, "Give me the strongest cough you can give." And I remember I was like I could barely cough because your abdominal muscles are just so weakened at that point. But yeah, I put him on my chest. I just remember thinking, "Oh my goodness, this is crazy! I can't believe I actually got here after all the 9 months of preparation and so much prayer and so much like dedication to just trying to take care of myself for the baby. And now he's here, and it was just amazing to see the smile on my husband's face with his firstborn son. It was the most beautiful thing. We were both just thanking God so much. It was an
beautiful.
amazing experience.
Oh, that is amazing.
Yeah, it
Oh.
was beautiful.
And then did you have any tearing or bleeding, any concerns after he came
Yeah,
out?
so I didn't have any perineal tears, but she said there was a laceration. I don't even remember where it was. It was a small one,
Mhm.
not perineal though. So they did add a couple of stitches, which was it was also painful because they didn't put
Mm.
any numbing cream or I don't know anything. So I felt that, but yeah, it wasn't bad at all. I do know that. Let's see here. They put me okay, so I forgot this part. I'm like my brain's all over the place. But
No, that's okay.
when I had called the midwives at around midnight, which was before my water broke. I called them because I was having, the regular Braxton hits, and I had one contraction that like lasted a really long time. It wasn't it wasn't like a normal Braxton Hicks contraction. It was just really tight, but my stomach stayed tight for like 20 minutes. So I called them, and the student midwife, she said, "Well, it could still be a few more days. It's just like your body's preparing. So you should take a sleeping pill and just try to sleep." And I didn't have any like sleeping medication or anything, but one of my sisters had melatonin, so I just took several doses of that, which I had never taken before, but I just took it, and I fell asleep. I woke up like an hour later with my water broken. So that was something I forgot to add, that I went through the whole birth
Wow.
absolutely exhausted and on melatonin. So that was probably one of the hardest parts, was just I was falling asleep in between contractions and probably acting somewhat intoxicated from how exhausted I was. So that part was difficult. I was just so tired. Like, I felt like my body was just going to give out pretty much through
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Well, thank God then your labor was 6 hours and
Oh
not
my
like
gosh, thank God. I can't
26
believe.
hours.
Oh, yes, I know. That would not have been fun.
Yeah. So how was your postpartum time with Cyrus?
So postpartum was actually, it was really good, especially now comparing it to this one. It was really, really good. I healed quickly, and well, I left the birth center a few hours later and had to walk up the 4 flights of stairs. So that was hard, but I think I started feeling somewhat normal again within about 5 days, and I was I wish I would have rested longer. I didn't really know to do that, but I was out and about and kind of back to normal life within a couple of weeks. Um, but Cyrus had a really severe tongue tie. So
Mhm.
the breastfeeding journey in the beginning was somewhat difficult. Um, I just had like really sore bleeding nipples. I mean, the whole thing. And he would breastfeed for 45 minutes to an hour plus every time. Um, but then he hadn't gotten back up to his birth weight by a couple weeks, I think. And I think at 3 days postpartum, I went to see a lactation consultant. She actually came into our house. And what we figured out was that there was a lot of output. I was making a lot of milk, and he was nursing for a long time, but it wasn't transferring. He wasn't actually like taking it in, because it would just
Sure.
all drip out the side. He didn't have like a good latch, right? So we had to really work on that. And then at 18 days old, he had a tongue tie revision. They use a cool laser. And the lactation consultant helped us to do the stretches, and everything. We didn't want to do the revision. We wanted to go the natural way, but his was pretty severe. So she recommended we do that. And breastfeeding was really good after the revision was done and healed. It was great from there, and he has breastfed ever since. Actually, he's still breastfeeding at 3 years old. So yeah, that was the postpartum experience. But it was I didn't really know what to expect. Of course, it was the first time, and I had a lot of help from family. But I think I healed faster than I expected to. And maybe part of that was just because I was 20. But um, yeah, it was really good.
Amazing. All right, so you went through your postpartum time frame, and then how was, because Cyrus developed or you noticed at some point that he had something medically going on, and I understand that he was throwing up a lot. Can you talk more about discovering that and what that time frame looked like?
Yeah, so he was really, really healthy in his newborn days, all the way up until 6 or 7 months. He had no issues at all. Breastfeeding was good. Stools were good. He hadn't gotten sick at all. But it was after I started introducing solids, a little bit after, maybe I was doing it for a few weeks, and he started to, he would get like really constipated, and then he would throw up. So it happened. It happened a few times. And then there was one like full vomiting episode. We actually thought that he got a stomach bug. And I remember I was like kicking myself because I had put him in a shopping cart for the first time and I thought it was that. So I was just so hard on myself thinking that, I caused all this because I put him in a shopping cart with germs. But yeah, he was vomiting for, it was like over 5 days, I think. And he was still nursing through some of it, so I just let him nurse. But then it passed, and it happened again a few weeks later. And again, I thought, okay, another stomach bug. What could it have been this time? And I tried several different things like at home remedies, and then he was better. But by the third time, I knew something was wrong. And I reached out to our naturopathic doctor, spoke with him. He gave me some tips and some things to give him, which I did. But this at this point turned into like maybe every couple of weeks he was having one of these episodes. So let's see here. I contacted the first pediatrician we went to. They required vaccines, so we left that practice and hadn't found a new one. Um, but I had heard there was a functional medicine clinic that had a really good doctor that he had been in practice for a really long time. And I heard great things about him in the holistic community. And they didn't require vaccines there. So I called in to set an appointment. And he was booked like 4+ weeks out. So I was really bummed about that, but I got the appointment and got on their cancellation list. And then Cyrus had another episode, and I was like, you know what? I can't wait that long to go in. So I called back, and they said that they had 2 locations and plenty of different practitioners. So I asked when the next available appointment was, and they put me with a nurse practitioner that was available like that following Monday. Um, so I went ahead with that appointment. We went in and they did he actually was in an episode when we went in, and they did a blood test, of course, asked a bunch of questions, took several different tests, which all came back completely normal. And we went back in the next day. The nurse practitioner had us go back in the next day, and he was still sick. She gave us some instructions on how to keep him hydrated. So we were doing that at home. But by the next day that we went in, she was concerned for how he looked because he was actively vomiting while we were there, and just very, he'd been vomiting for a couple of days. So she wanted us to go into the ER because she was concerned of, I think she said pylori, something, can't remember what it's called,
Like
but
H. pylori.
yeah, something like that. And she had a concern of that we need to get tested for in the hospital. So she was saying, because I'm not seeing anything wrong on any tests that I see here, I'm afraid it could be something bigger and not something that I could test for. So I think you guys should just go in. At least we could get an IV in. He can get some hydration and maybe do some of that testing. So, us, of course, since the COVID lockdowns, have heard all the horror stories about the hospital and are kind of like getting red pilled into, that whole system. So we were definitely nervous to go in, but we're of course going to do whatever was needed to make sure that he was well. So we went straight from the pediatrician's office straight to the ER. And we took him in there. They ended up admitting him, and we were there, I think, for 4 days. So they just ran, I think, all the same tests. Did tons of tests. Again, everything came back so normal, just completely normal. And by this point, because in his episodes, it like goes to a peak, and then he starts to get better the last day or so, and then it just like stops. The vomiting stops. But he, at this point, would be vomiting up to like 80 plus times a day. And he would get down to the blood in the bile. And this was just this episode and the previous one. They had just started getting bad. So I'm telling all the doctors, it's like, here's what's happening. Here's how many times he's vomiting. He also, on this episode, stopped nursing as much because he was just so fatigued. So I'm telling them all my concerns. Like, here's what it looks like. It's really, really bad. And at the point that we got there, he was vomiting less or almost completely stopped vomiting. So they couldn't see it. And, we found out later that they didn't believe that story, what we were saying and how much he was vomiting. And they kept like pushing and asking, well, how much are you feeding him? And they were so focused on his weight loss because in that week he lost a lot of weight from how much he was throwing up. Um, and they kept asking about like his feeding schedule. And I'm telling them, well, I'm nursing him anytime he'll nurse. I mean, honestly, sometimes like all day, um, even if he keeps, pulling off. But he's throwing up, so that's why he's losing weight. Like I keep telling them, of course he's losing weight. Like I'm literally watching the weight come out of him, but they really weren't buying that at all. And so they ended up putting an NG tube in to feed him. And he was still losing weight though too, because he would also throw that up after each feed.
Sure.
So they talked about putting a G tube in, which they ended up having to do. But yeah, I mean, just more tests. And I told them, because at this point, we had already gone to our naturopathic doctor to see him. And he did like some muscle testing and a couple of other things, and told us basically there was some issues with his gut and there was inflammation, and gave us like some instructions of what to do, and put me on a super, super strict diet. So that way the breast milk was totally clean. And then told us give it like several weeks, and like he's still going to vomit a bit, but it will start to clear up. So we felt pretty confident in what he had told us. And when we went in there, I had told the doctors, okay, our naturopathic doctor said there's issues with his gut. And like, I don't know much, but if he's vomiting this much, it makes sense to me that something's wrong with his gut. And the main doctor there, she kind of had a God complex, but I remember she just looked at me and was like, I've been doing this for 20 years, and like it's not his gut. It's not a gut problem. And I was like, okay. Um, that's hard to believe, but they just kept doing blood tests, x-rays, blood tests, x-ray, like just the same tests, right? So while we were in there, she asked his vaccine status. And when I told her that he wasn't vaccinated, then the doctor became pretty like, hostile at that point. And that, of course, made us a bit nervous. But after they just, I think they put him on some medication as well. Nothing was working in the hospital. He was not getting any better. And at home, at this point, we had like figured out a routine, and we know, okay, by like day 5, he starts to get over, he'll kind of get over it a little bit. And then after about a day, he'll like snap and be completely back to normal. Then he starts breastfeeding. So we kind of knew that. And if he ever got past like the 3 or 4 day mark and didn't start turning a corner, it was always because he was constipated. So this is like, we're trying to figure out patterns here. And uh, the first pediatrician had recommended an enema. So we ended up doing one of those, which worked immediately. And before we went to the hospital, we tried one of these. So kind of backtracking a little bit, we knew that worked. We had tried this a few times already, and it worked really well for him if he hadn't already started to get better himself. So I told them that, I told the doctor that I believe he was constipated and we needed to do an enema. And she was like, "Oh no, just like give him time, he'll be fine." And they did a let's see here, what's it called? The barium contrast, where they put it down and do like an X-ray, which was absolutely awful because they like tried to get me to hold him down while he's like screaming and they're shoving it down. I just couldn't do it. And I had to like walk away. So then they had somebody else do it, and it was horrifying
Did they
to
give him
watch.
sedation or anything like that
No,
to help
no,
him? Oh,
no,
goodness.
it was absolutely awful. And then of course he's got the strongest gag reflex at this point. So he's just like gagging and it sounds like he's choking. And like I was just like, I can't do this. Both my husband and I were just like, it was very difficult. But the X-ray technician came in the next day and said that the barium contrast hadn't moved from where it was the day before. So I was like, he's very constipated. Like we got to get stuff moving, and they just kept ignoring that. And I requested an enema like over and over and over. Every doctor that came in, every nurse that came in, I repeated the same thing and asked the same thing. Um, my husband went out and asked them multiple times. They just never would do it. And finally, I think a day after, they agreed to do a suppository, which I didn't want to do because I know enemas work really fast. I mean, within a couple of minutes, and it's like cleaner. But they did that. And again, it's not working, right? For a whole day passes, still nothing happens. And what we ended up doing is I left the hospital. My dad came and picked me up, and my husband stayed there with Cyrus. I ran home, grabbed an enema, and we went back into the hospital. Um, I hid it in a cup, like in a to-go cup. And when the nurses left, we like closed the curtain and just did it ourselves really fast. I gotten fast with it at this point, did it really fast. Of course, it immediately worked. Um, he had a bowel movement. We like pulled it all off, and they were having us weigh each diaper and tell them like with all the diapers. So I knew I had to tell them that because otherwise they would count it as weight loss. Like he lost more weight, and the more weight he lost, then we couldn't leave the hospital. So we had to tell them that he had a bowel movement. So um, we called the nurses in and we're like, "Oh yay, he pooped, right?" And then they were like, "See, like we told you, just be patient, and the suppository will work." And we're like, "Okay, yeah." So we did that, and of course, immediately, just like we had told the doctors, he was better. No more vomiting. He was just doing fine. And so we asked if we could go home. We had actually asked the day before if we could go home because our idea was, they're not doing anything here to help. He's actually getting worse in their care. And we already have a routine. We know how to care for him. And if they're not giving us any more information, they're not telling us, they're not discovering anything new, then we could just care for him better at home and we will stay doing our care with a naturopathic doctor. So they said no, that we shouldn't go home, right? Of course, we asked if
Which,
we could go home.
sorry to interrupt you, which, by the way, is your right as a human being, hiring the hospital for their expertise. If there's nothing there that you are needing, if all their tools are not helpful to you, your human right is that you can choose what tools are working for you and your
Absolutely.
family. And being a mother and having that intuition, having that pattern recognition, we all know this, right? Moms know their children best. You are clearly an amazing mother, knowing your child, knowing these patterns, and knowing exactly what it would take to help your son improve, and doing that in whatever way is needed, to make that happen. So I just want to commend you for that and highlight that piece of it that we often can fall into almost this trance if we go into a medical provider. And of course, they are super helpful in many situations. However, if they're not helping in our situation, then we do have that right to accept the care that or decline the care that we feel is right for our family.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the difficult things about being in the hospital sometimes, especially if you're a family who prefers more holistic methods of healing. It can be kind of like walking into the lion's den, specifically and especially when you're taking your child in, because then they start to use the law and try to get you in trouble. And um, it's very easy for them to threaten and manipulate when they use your child as bait and start making claims that they could die, or it's just, it gets really dramatic and difficult in there. But yeah, so that's what happened. um we asked multiple times if we could leave, and they said we couldn't leave because they wanted to monitor his weight gain. But we're telling them, like, oh, we could care for him better at home. He's not getting better here. So we decided to stay because one of the nurses came in, and she said that she started crying, and it was very clearly fake crying, saying, "I've seen babies die before," and she wasn't saying like what he could die from or anything, right? She's just saying basically like, if we leave, like, what if he dies? And she's like, "I've had to talk to parents who like wish they would have stayed in because then their baby died, and I've seen dead babies, whatever." And she's saying this all through like fake tears. And so I'm like, ugh. But then at the same time, it works because as parents, it's like if there's any chance that something like that could happen, you're just, we stayed because it's like, okay, what are you going to do, right? Like, I mean,
Of course.
we were honestly a little bit scared. And then she also said that she said if you guys leave, we would have to call social services. Um, so that of course freaked us out, and we were like, okay, so we ended up staying that night. And to give you a little bit of context too, kind of in the past year or so, we had just learned a few things about social services, child protective services, and how they work. Because we had kind of always had the idea that, they help children in abusive situations, or they have bad parents, and they're like there for that reason. So it wasn't until like maybe the year or so before that we had started hearing stories and started hearing of like, the bureaucracy and the just the corruption in the child protective services, with all of that. So like I had just, I won't tell the story, but one of our friends had just told us a horror story from their child that was taken, pretty much, I think, at a few weeks old. And being a new mom, I remember like after hearing that story, I couldn't sleep for a couple of days. It was just really,
Yeah.
really traumatizing to hear. And I was hearing story after story after story, just learning about it now as a mom.
Yeah. So
So,
you're in Florida now, right?
yes,
You're in Florida, and this was in Idaho.
yeah,
Is
this is
that
an
right? Okay.
So I had also heard that they were particularly bad there. And from the things we had learned, um, I knew that if your child was taken or they start to investigate you, it's not just like they see you and say, okay, you're not guilty, obviously, and then close the case. It's something that's ongoing for a really long time. They often take the children anyways. It's like, um, the whole guilty until proven innocent thing. That's what they do. And even if you are innocent, you could still possibly never get your child back if you don't have the money
Yeah.
to fight for them, or if it could take months or years. These are the stories I've heard. So
So
my
this
husband
is
and
what's happening. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. So this is what's happening in the back of your mind
yeah,
as they're telling you, "Oh, we might have to get social services
yeah,
involved." So
yes,
that and pulling the dead baby card even in the absence of that threat, it, we call it the dead baby card in birth work. And it's the same thing. So whether your baby is in or out, it is
yeah,
coercive control of the most horrific kind. Because then, of course, no one can
it
fault you for
works.
saying yes. Of course, we're going to
Yeah,
stay and we're going to do whatever we can to protect our baby. And then you have this threat on top of it.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So when they left the room, my husband and I were talking, and he was like, I'm just not willing to even get on their radar, right? Like we know it's devastating if you do. So we're just like, okay. And we're very, I mean, both my husband and I were the same age, and I think part of it when we went into the hospital, um, we told them we were cash pay. My husband and I owned a business, so we have always paid for all of our health care. We did chiropractic, naturopathic stuff, that stuff you pay out of pocket for, right? So we've never needed insurance. But they really saw that as like a big issue that we didn't have insurance. And they saw that we were young. I think, in a sense, might have felt that they could take advantage of us a little bit, because although we were asking questions and like trying to advocate, we were still going out of our way to be very, very kind and like appreciative with the nurses and doctors. And maybe it came across as like more vulnerable. I don't know, but because they were, I don't know if it was just us, but they were definitely treating us like kids. Like, you don't know what you're doing. We're doctors, so whenever I would say things or my husband would say things, they would just kind of like almost scoff at us, like we had no place to speak because they were the professionals. So that's something I noticed for sure. But yeah, we were talking. My husband was like, "Well, let's just maintain like we'll still treat them really well. Try to just like get out of here as soon as possible, and then we can take care of everything from there." Um, but by the next day, he was completely better. Like, he was just playing toys. There was no vomiting, just like normal, right? Like how it happens after the enemas. So we asked if we could go home, and they did end up discharging us. But before they discharged us, the main doctor, wanted to set up an appointment for us to see a pediatrician, like a follow up appointment. So she ended up calling the first pediatrician that we went to, and got another nurse practitioner from their practice, who was supposedly worked better with NG tubes, because he still had it in when they discharged us. So we were discharged on a Friday, and then she set up this appointment for Monday. So we went in on Monday, and I think he was doing better, or was Monday or Tuesday. He started another episode because he went in again on Tuesday, I believe. Um, and he had lost some more weight because he lost, I think, point 2 ounces, something like that. It was like 2 ounces, something that he could have had in like half a feed, right?
Sure.
And he hadn't had his bottle yet or anything. So I remember the nurse practitioner was super concerned about that he had lost. And I was trying to ask him, okay, well, how much weight is that? It doesn't really seem like too much. But he had recommended to us that we add. I was giving him pumped breast milk, and because I had at this point I was losing my milk supply because he wouldn't nurse very long, so the
Sure.
supply and demand, was going away. So I had a bunch of frozen breast milk that he was drinking out of a bottle, and he recommended that we add goat's milk powder, or so you could add like a scoop of formula just to bulk it up. But we decided to go with the goat's milk formula. So we did that night, I think, and then it made him start to throw up some more. So he lost more weight by the next day that we went in. And I can't remember what he had us do, but this nurse practitioner had us do something else. And then he asked us to come in on Thursday for another weight check.
Mhm.
So we went in on Thursday for another weight check. And then he said, well, I would like for him to come in again tomorrow before the weekend so we can get another weight and make sure he's doing good. And I remember him saying, like, I won't be here at that time, but one of the nurses can weigh him, and I won't even charge you for it. But I just wanted to get a weight.
Yeah. So
Go
this
ahead.
whole time, you're in the hospital, you're going through all these appointments. They tell you it's not a gut issue, which you clearly know it's a gut issue, and resolve the gut issue yourself in the absence of hospital care, um, even though you were in the hospital. Did you ever get a diagnosis this whole time?
Yeah, no diagnosis, no diagnosis in the hospital at all, or in the pediatrician's office. So,
Okay.
and by the way, also going to the pediatrician, even though it's supposed to be a functional medicine clinic, um, and so they were definitely better. But even then, what he had was no one could really figure it out. So they weren't helping too much either, although they were getting closer, I feel like, right? Um, but, anyways, the only reason we kept going in is because of the fear, basically, that like if we didn't go in, that they would call. So we're kind of just trying to just like do whatever we can to keep Sarah safe. And my husband and I were talking about this. I told him, I was like, I feel like, especially when we were in the hospital, like I have to choose between his health or his safety. Like I feel like for his health, we need to take him home, but for his safety, like to protect him from, social services, we have to stay in. So like weighing that out is just that was really difficult to do.
Mhm.
But we ended up, let's see here. He asked us to go in the next day for that weight check, and this whole week, I was just so stressed trying to figure everything out, right? So stressed, not sleeping. He's vomiting through the night. And I woke up with a sore throat. I was feeling like, okay, I'm about to like get pretty sick. So my husband was like, well, why don't you just go to sleep and let's cancel the appointment? And I was like, well, I don't feel good canceling the appointment or postponing it because what if, what if they are not okay with that? And he was like, it's fine. We can just go in on Monday, right? Because I don't want you going out sick like that. And then also, this is during COVID time, and there's all the signs and policies everywhere that, like, if you have a sniffle, don't come out at all.
Right.
So um, I went ahead and called. The appointment was set, I think, for 10. And I called around 9, and they actually didn't answer. So I just left a voicemail, asked them to call back, and said that we could go in on Monday. And again, this is not like an important appointment. It's just, we're not even going to see the nurse practitioner. It's just to put a weight on the scale. So I know it's not a big deal. I leave the voicemail, uh, put my phone on silent, and go back to sleep with Cyrus. Then I wake up, I don't know how long later, maybe in a few hours, and my phone was kind of like blown up. There was a message from a social worker that she said what her name was and said that she wanted to talk to me about Cyrus. So, of course, my heart just like completely drops and I'm freaking out. I gave the phone to my husband, and we told my family. He talked to my dad on the phone, and they were together trying to like figure out, okay, how are we going to go about this, right? What are we going to do? So um, we ended up, what did we do? We ended up, uh, my husband started writing up some legal paper to give to them, not like a cease and desist, but something like that. And we decided that day, I was home with Cyrus, sorry, and my husband ended up calling the social worker back on my phone because I couldn't talk to her. I was too emotional, and
Of
he took care
course.
of all that for me. But so he talked to the social worker, and she said, I want you guys to come into this building. It was called Faces of Hope Victim Center, and they wanted to check out Cyrus there. So she wanted us to go there that afternoon. He never agreed to go. Um, and then afterwards, we looked up the location, and it was an abuse center where they check children to see if they've been sexually abused. And she had told Levi that she's going to have police officers there when we get there. So, of course, freaking out, like this escalated so fast. We decided not to go because we both agreed they would probably try to take him. And remember, at this point, we're like, we haven't done anything wrong, right?
Of
Like, we're
course. Right.
desperately trying to get all the help we could get. We know we haven't done anything wrong, but also we kind of know how they work. And there's just no way because, our thinking was like, let's try to solve this from the back end instead of being like met with police officers and social workers and then they take him and then we fight it. Let's try to fight it before it gets to that point.
Right.
So that's the thought, right? So we ended up that night. My parents, they were planning on moving to Florida, and they were supposed to, I think the following Tuesday after that, they were supposed to um, like drive off. They had their moving trucks, so they were in the middle of packing and doing, just all moving across the country, right? A big family across the country. So one of our good friends that was my husband's business partner, he was good friends with the family, and he owned a restaurant there in the town that we were in, and he had invited my family over. For like a barbecue, just like going away last dinner before they moved, right? So it was scheduled for that night, and my husband was like, I know you're probably not going to want to go. I'll just take you to your mom's house. She was going to stay back and finish packing. And I was like, no, you know what? I really want to go. I would like to go tonight because this friend of ours, he is an ex-Marine and ex-police officer. He's a retired police officer. So I was like, I would like to talk to him. And I know he knows how all that stuff works. So I want to talk to him. So we go there that night. I remember I just felt so sick. They were all like talking, eating. I couldn't even eat. I was just sick to my stomach. And I remember my dad being like, look, it's going to be okay. Just get some food. And I was just sitting on the couch holding Cyrus. And I remember I was holding my phone, texting my mom, and she was sending me like, some encouragement and like scriptures about faith. And I remember my phone all of a sudden just like overheated. Like it's never happened to me again before or after that, but it just got so hot, like I couldn't even touch it. And I was like, that's super weird. Why is it? I wasn't even on it much today. But I remember it was like an intrusive thought to where I was like, what if they're like tracking our phones? That would be weird. And then I was like, no, stop, don't be that way. Like I'm trying to tell myself, don't have intrusive thoughts, right? But I just my gut feeling was so scared. I was just like, I feel like they're going to take him. Something's telling me they're going to take him. And I'm telling my dad, I'm telling my husband, and everyone's like, you did nothing wrong. No, we didn't do anything wrong. There's no way we could. And
Is that what your friend said too? Were you able to talk to
yeah,
him and
so
kind of
our police officer friend, yeah, I talked to him about it and told him what was going on, told him the whole thing. He was like, wow, like, that's crazy that they were calling you. But he said, you're going to be fine. You didn't do anything wrong. There's no probable cause. There's just nothing. And he was talking about some of the situations where he's been in, where he saw kids that were actually abused, but they still didn't have enough probable cause. And him as a police officer couldn't remove them. And that was hard for him because he had to leave them in bad situations. I think he was a police officer. It was over a decade ago, so maybe
Mhm.
things were different. But he was telling us that you did absolutely nothing wrong. You shouldn't be worried. And I was like, okay, well, just tell me this. Like, when we leave here tonight and drive home, say we get pulled over for some reason, maybe like not having a front license plate or just whatever, even if they're not pulling us over for that, when they run our license, could anything come up? Like if they already have an open case, could something come up? Because I was just concerned that we weren't going to make it home. Like, I just had this gut feeling.
Hmm.
And I was like, what if we leave here? What if they pull us over? And he was like, there's no way. There's just no way you're going to be fine. So I was like, okay. Again, just so stressed. And we leave that night. We decided we were going to stay at my parents' house that night just so we were all together. So my dad and my sister and my two little brothers, they were also there and we were in separate cars. So we were about to follow each other home. And my older sister was like, I'll jump in with you guys. So she jumped in the front seat. I was in the back with Cyrus. And we pulled out where our friends were living. It was downtown. So there was like parallel parking,
Hmm.
like townhouse parallel parking. And when my husband pulled out in his truck, we saw on the opposite side, parallel park, there was a police car that we went ahead and turned, and they turned behind us. And I remember when I saw the first one turn behind us, my, again, stomach dropped. And I was just like,
Yeah.
I knew like this was that he was there for us. And he had just watched us load up. Um, and then I look up and there was another one that turned in front of us. So I was like, oh my gosh. And my sister immediately calls my dad, who was in front of us. And he said, okay, I'll do a U-turn. I'll flip around and come to you guys, but just pull into the gas station. So it's a lighted area. So my husband pulls into the gas station. And once we park there, the lights come on. And by the time I looked up, I think there were already like 4 or 5 police vehicles at
Okay.
this
I'm going to pause you just for a moment because I need to take a deep breath here. And I'm
point.
sure maybe our listeners do too. So, everybody, let's take a deep breath together.
It was a lot of deep breaths needed at that time.
Okay. So, also, I just wanted to mention that if this is this is a hard part of the story. And we
Yeah,
know that, this is called the Triumphant Birth Podcast. We are going to get to the birth of your twins and how that was healing for you. This is going to be a longer episode, or broken into two. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that we may have moms listening who are pregnant, who are close to giving birth. And so if this story is something that is not supportive for you to hear, then maybe earmark it and come back to it later when you're ready. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to pause there before you continue. But I think that the story in its entirety is really important to tell and to share.
awesome.
So you're in the gas station.
Yes. So we're in the gas station. I look up. At this point, we're completely surrounded by, undercover police, patrol vehicles, just like from I think 4 different cities. They all came in, and I'm thinking, okay, this is really dramatic, and this is really, really bad. And I called our friend whose house we just left. We're now like 2 minutes from his house, and I'm telling him, I'm like, Ed, we're completely surrounded by police officers. And I think they're going to take Cyrus. And he was like, he didn't believe me. He was like, are you kidding? And I was like, no, I'm serious. He's like, you're dead serious right now. So he was like, all right, I'll be right over. So that happens. And then at this time too, you'll need some context for this. So I don't know if you've heard of him, but there's a guy named Ammon Bundy, and him and his family. I don't know if you've heard of their story, but they had a situation years ago in Nevada where the government tried to wrongfully take his family's ranch. They had hundreds of acres, and um, a lot of citizens stood up for them. I think like thousands and thousands of people from all over the country went with like firearms and everything and stood between the federal government and them, and the federal government actually backed down. And they got to keep their land. So it's a really big story, the Bundy families. And they actually, a couple years later, the government was doing this to another family in Oregon. So the Bundys went to help. And I think like 6 of the brothers got arrested, including the elderly father. And they spent 2 years in prison. Ammon Bundy specifically spent 2 years in prison, 1 year in solitary confinement, and he was never convicted of any crime. So just completely, it was completely wrong.
Mhm.
But he got out of jail and he was living in Idaho. And through all the COVID lockdowns, our families met and became really, really close. And he was close friends with my dad. Him and my dad were doing a lot of like, speaking out against all the medical stuff and just everything happening during the lockdowns. So they were really close friends, and between the two of them, have a lot of connections in our city at the time. Um, and Ammon Bundy was running for governor that year in 2021. He was a candidate for governor, and we were helping with his campaign. My sister worked for his campaign, and she was right there in the front seat when this happened. So she FaceTimed his wife, and he was with her, and she showed him what was happening. Passed me the phone to the back, and I'm like on the verge of tears, and I'm telling him like they're gonna take him, they're gonna take him. What do I do? And so he was just like, okay, calm down, don't let them take him, and you need to get on Facebook and live stream. And I wasn't super active on there. I was like, okay, I don't even know if I don't know how to do that, but I was like, I'll record it. I'll record it. So at least I have it. He was like, no, no, no. You need to live stream. Just like listen, live stream. So I was just like, okay, okay, I'll do that then. I didn't really think about it. I just did it. I found it, the live stream button, and I started live streaming at this point, and it's probably like 11 p.m. by now. So and then he said he was on his way. So he lived about an hour from there, and he started driving down. And because of the live stream, within 10 to 15 minutes or so, there were probably like half a dozen to a dozen people that showed up at the gas station. Um, People that we knew. We had a lot of like activist friends because we did this together, right, during COVID. So they showed up. People are recording and asking the police officers questions. So I'm still sitting here in the vehicle. We also my mom reached out to some attorney friends that we had. So it's like everyone's just like contacting everybody at this point. And so our attorney friends showed up within like 10 or 15 minutes. They happened to
Wow.
be, they live pretty close by. So our two attorneys, they're there on the spot. And we're still in the vehicle. They're asking us questions. They're saying, hey, we've been looking for you all day. And which we didn't know that. But they asked what happened in the hospital, and didn't really seem to care about my answers. And just, it seemed like we were already presumed guilty, right? And then there was like a lot of waiting around. I remember my dad started praying. He used to be a pastor. So he was like praying really loudly and intensely, and they were like mocking him for it, some of the police officers. And then we all started like singing a hymnal, just like while we're waiting, because we don't know what's going on.
Oh,
And they're all going into their vehicles and they're getting paperwork and they're talking to each other. And just every couple minutes, another police car shows up. And it looks like a crime scene, quite honestly. So we're praying and we're singing and we're trying to like stay calm. And then they come up to the window. They come up to my husband's window, open up the car door, and just pull him out and say, "You're under arrest." And he's asking like, "What am I under arrest for?" And they wouldn't tell him. And then he asked if he could speak to his attorney, who was right there. And they said, "No, not right now." They pulled him out, slammed him up against the window in the back where I was sitting, holding Cyrus. And they told him he was under arrest for felony injury to a child. A felony, right? So I'm thinking, okay, this is really, really bad. Like, how could this be a felony? And my sister's recording in the front, so they're telling her that she's under arrest too to get out of the vehicle. So she's asking, like, what am I under arrest for? And they told her she was also under arrest for felony injury to a child. And so I'm thinking, they thought she was the mom, right? Because she was sitting in the front seat. And she was like, "That's not my child." And then the police officer said that she was now going to be under arrest for falsifying information to an officer. But he didn't realize that I was sitting in the back. And the whole time, we have video of this. The lead detective watched the whole thing, and he had just finished talking to me and identified me as the mother with the window rolled down, and then went and watched this police officer arrest my sister. And he never intervened. He just watched it happen. Never corrected the officer. So they arrested my sister. They arrested my husband. Then they arrested my sister and took them away. So now it's just me by myself, isolated, sitting there with Cyrus. So they come around they're just like eliminating any comfort I had left, and these people who are going to try to stand up for me. Um, so they come around to my side, open the door, and I'm really, really scared. I'm like begging the officers to, I'm trying to tell them what's going on, and they're telling me that they wanted to search me. So they asked for me to give the baby to them so they could search me for weapons. And I was like, no, 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 no. Like, I don't trust you. I know you're going to keep him if I let you search me. Like, I can't let him go. And so, the one officer was telling me, like, I promise, we'll give him back to you. You can trust us. This whole thing, like, we're literally just going to search you. So after a few minutes of that, they convinced me to give him over so they could search me. And then they did give him back. This whole time I'm live streaming still, but they gave him back. And then the officer was like, see, I told you, if you could trust us, we'll give you your baby back. We just need to search you. So I'm like, okay. And later on, looking back at this, someone told me they were like grooming you basically to trust them. And they asked me at this point if I could get into the ambulance. They had a couple of ambulances there, I believe, at this point. Asked me if I could get into the ambulance. And they said they wanted to take Cyrus to the hospital and that I could stay with him. They said, if you get into the ambulance, you can get your diaper bag and your things. And if you go with us to the hospital, we're just going to check him out. We just want to make sure he's okay. We want to make sure everything's good. And you could stay with him. And I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, that's okay. That's reasonable. Like, if I have to go to the hospital, as long as I'm with him, doesn't matter, right? As long as I'm with him, it'll be okay. So I made them promise me, like, you promise I could stay with him the whole time, not be separated. And they're like, we promise we won't be separated, the whole thing. So because I at this point I'm in the middle of the gas station. I'm just like standing in the middle with all the police cars surrounding me, and then people like civilians recording and like yelling at them and stuff. And I'm just like in the dead middle of this. So they were trying to get me away and hidden from cameras and people, attorneys, all of it. So I get into the ambulance, got my diaper bag, everything. And I get in the ambulance, sit down on the little seats on the side. And then the detectives come in. There were a couple of detectives, a couple of officers, and then the paramedics as well. So I'm again like surrounded by all these people. And the lead detective handed me a slip of paper and said that your son is now in custody of the state, and you need to hand him over to us or you'll be arrested. And so I'm like, okay, well, I mean, I was just promised that I could go with him to the hospital, right? And they were like, well, that's not our decision, or this is just what we did. So I think I went on for maybe like 5 minutes trying to reason with these officers and asking who made the decision, who's the one that's in charge, like, what could I do? Basically, at this point, I'm like, anything, anybody, like, somebody help me here. This is just so wrong. And then I'm telling them, I told the lead detective, he has this issue where he doesn't properly digest proteins. This is what we're believing it was at this point, his gut issues. And I told them he only can take breast milk. He can't have anything else. He needs me there. And I'm like begging them. I was like, I just need to be in the same room. I just need to breastfeed. I won't like do anything else. Just let me go with him. He needs to be able to nurse. And he was like, oh, well, basically, like, there's nothing we can do about that. So, I mean, that's honestly like actively putting him in danger. They knew I told them he only takes breast milk, and they didn't care at that point. So clearly they're not looking out for his well-being, which is what they were claiming they were doing. And so I'm just like begging them, and he's saying, you don't hand him over, you're going to be arrested. And then again, he said, you need to hand him over to the EMT, and then you can go on your merry way. That's what the lead detective told me. Hand him over to the EMT, and then you can go on your merry way. And there was just there was some officer, obviously there were a lot of officers there, normal officers, but the one lead detective just was so cold hearted and has clearly done this a lot of times, and no compassion, no empathy. It was horrible. He said, you need to hand him over so no further harm is done to him. So I'm thinking in my mind, like, okay, if I don't give him over, they're going to like hurt him, trying to like rip him out of my arms. Right. So, but I was like, I'm not going to volunteer to give him to them. I can't look him in the eyes when he grows up and tell him that I just gave him up like that. Um,
Yeah,
so
how
I
do
was
you
just holding on
physically
to
do
him.
that as a mother? How yeah,
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try not to interrupt because
No, 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 you're good.
oh, okay, continue.
So I'm just holding on to him, but I knew, okay, if they come to take him, I can't resist because the way these officers were acting, I know they would have no problem with hurting him in the process of taking him. So I knew, okay, I can't physically resist so that he's safe, but I'm not going to hand him over. And I'm still, by the way, I'm holding my phone like this and live streaming. So people are watching this on the spot, even though it was late and more people are showing up. Um, but I, he ends up walking over and pulls the phone out of my hands, like knocks it down. And then he was saying something again about how, or I needed to not resist so he wasn't hurt. So I didn't resist in any way. I just like let him go. I let them take him and just like pulled him right away. And then I stood up and they said, okay, you're going to jail. Um, and an officer handcuffed me. And I'm telling them like, okay, I let him go. I didn't resist because I'm thinking I need to get in my husband's truck and go follow the ambulance and like see
Right.
where he's going so I can like, I don't know, maybe I didn't know what I was gonna do, but I needed to not be in jail, right? So I'm like, I didn't resist. I didn't want to get arrested, but they're like, no, no, she's going to jail, like for sure. So I was arrested. I remember as I don't know if I should even say that part because it's really hard. Sorry. Um, but yeah, I saw him as I was going out of the ambulance and his little eyes, he was reaching out for me. He could already say mama at that point. So that was just like really, really hard. I was like crying for him. And I was walked over to the patrol vehicle. They pat me down again, and I could see the ambulance going with his little in the window. He's in his little car seat in there. So I didn't know when I would see him again, and that was really, really hard. Um, but yeah, so I they take me in the patrol vehicle to the police station, and they had let my husband go. Um, he was just detained. They let him go, and my sister and I, they took us to jail, booked us in, and our charges, both of our charges, were resisting and obstructing. That's what it ended up being. And at the time this happened, our friend Ammon Bundy had drove down to the hospital. He said he already knew that they were going to take him and they would take him to the children's hospital. So he just went straight to the hospital. So when my sister and I were in jail, he he showed up at the hospital with a bunch of other people. I think there must have been 20 plus people, and it's like 3 a.m. at this point. Um, so he was at the hospital. They were at the entrance, basically demanding that the hospital give the baby back. And they ended up arresting him, Ammon Bundy, who's a candidate for governor. They arrested him and his campaign manager, who was like a 70-year-old grandma. And they arrested her in a really abusive way too. So I'm sitting in jail with my sister. We're booked in. We're trying to call people, and I
So you have
see.
sorry, that was my question. You have your phone at this point? I'm
Um,
not very familiar with the justice system. Are you able
yeah.
to know and get updates that all this is happening?
So when you go into jail, when they take everything from you,
Mhm.
they had us take like everything off, these all of our belongings, and put them like in a bag somewhere. So, but there's a jail phone that you can use. So we were just trying to call like numbers that we knew. So yeah, I wasn't on my phone. I couldn't like update myself
Sure.
or anything in that way. We were just like in, I don't know, in the jail like processing room. And I saw they were talking about in this in our city. Ammon, he was arrested multiple times during the COVID lockdowns for defying the orders, basically, right? So he was well known in like the police agencies for that. And they also know our family because, even though none of us were arrested, we had been at a lot of events with him and were there with him while he got arrested. So they knew who we were, basically. I think
Yeah.
that's another part of the story. A lot of people do talk about is that some people think it was um, maybe the aggression of it, and like the amount of officers and all that could have been due to the fact, they knew who Ammon was and who our family was.
Yeah, guilty by
So
association, basically.
exactly. So we're in jail, and I see them talking about Ammon, right? Like I can overhear them talking about him. And then I saw him come in, walk in, and so I'm like, oh shoot, they arrested him. And then I saw his campaign manager come in. Um, and she thought, I think when she came into like the jail processing room, I think she thought she had been let out, and that we were all like greeting her because it was my sister and I. But I was like, no, we're in jail. Like, we're in jail together right now. So that was kind of crazy. Four of us got arrested that night. And when my dad and our police officer friend Ed, they bailed us out. It takes some time to get bailed out, but they both bailed us out. And when we got out of the jail, we got in the truck with our police officer friend, and we're like, take us. I mean, I was like, take me straight to the hospital, which is where my husband was. He went straight to the hospital. Um, so we get to the hospital, and I'm just asking, like, where's Cyrus? Where's Cyrus? Like, what can I do? And our attorneys are there. So we're talking to the attorneys. And I just remember I asked the attorney, I was like, okay, what could I do at this point? How can I get him home? Can I go in to see him? Even if I have to stay in the hospital, like what are my options basically? I don't know how this stuff works.
Right.
And he was like, okay, at this point, your best bet is just going to be to go home. And we are going to see like basically, um, the next thing is we had to wait for, there was a hearing set for Tuesday, I believe. And I remember I was just like, I can't go home without him. That's like, would be like, I would feel so defeated. Like there's something we have to do now. I can't accept this.
Right.
Um, and my husband's asking him all the options, and I was just like, I can't go home. He's like, I'm sorry. There's nothing we can do tonight or in the morning, I guess. And so I remember just like sitting down on the curb with my husband and just like bawling my eyes out, like, I felt so defeated. Like, there's nothing we can do, and I can't take my son home. And there's no way I could go home without him. How am I supposed to do this? Like, I'm not strong enough for this. And my husband, we both just like sat there and cried together. But we had to leave. We had to go home, and we went to my parents' house, and I don't know, it was probably like 6 in the morning at this point, and maybe slept for about an hour, and then woke up and went straight over to the hospital again, where they were holding him. Um, and when we got there, there were like 400, maybe almost 500 people at the hospital. Um, they had signs. I mean, I don't know how people do this fast. It was absolutely incredible to see. They had signs with like Cyrus's picture, with our picture, saying "Give Cyrus back." Medical kidnapping is wrong. Just like it was huge. And I remember we're driving in, we could see all these people, and we lived at this point in Idaho for over a decade and built up a lot of relationships in the community. And I just remember seeing so many people I didn't know, but also so many people that we did know, familiar faces maybe that we hadn't seen in 5+ years or since we first moved there, just people we've known from all different walks of life, all different political associations, all different religions, just everybody there. Demanding that they return Cyrus. And that was like so humbling, and made us very emotional to see all of this support. And it was because the number one, because Ammon was arrested, and he is a national and international figure. Anything that he does pretty much is national news. So because of that, it got a lot of attention. His arrest, because he got arrested, that got a lot of attention. And then also because of the live stream, it was just shared thousands of times, my live stream video. So people
Hmm.
saw what happened, they saw it in real time, and were able to see it the next morning. So yeah, everybody was there just showing so much support and love to our family. And then one of the most difficult parts was the amount of parents that came up to me that day, dozens of parents that were telling me their stories. And that's why they were there to support, because they've been through it. and telling me what happened, like, what it was. Sometimes it was because they homeschooled, it was a homeschool family, or because they didn't vaccinate. And they're telling me, like, it's been 5 years and I have no idea where my kids are. I have no idea where my kids are. And, or they're saying, my baby wasn't returned to me until like it was 8 months or a year later, and they were taken as a newborn, or just all these stories. They were all different, but had the same ending. They were so horrible. And I was trying to have faith, like, okay, we're going to get him back. It's going to be okay. We're going to figure it out. But then hearing all these stories and learning how the system works, I'm like, it never works in your favor, no matter how innocent you are. So it was really, really difficult. I was just like wrestling with my faith there and thinking, like, well, this happens to so many innocent people. Why would I think that I'm any better, that I'm going to make it out, that my son's going to come out of this? So I was just, and through this whole time, like before Cyrus was taken, after I got that initial call from the social worker, my husband and I were praying so much. We were just constantly praying together. And I've never felt so close to God than at that point, because I was just talking to him all day, like so focused on talking to him. And I could feel him so close to me, even as Cyrus was taken. Um, I knew he was going to be taken, but I had no strength. I remember before they came to the back door to open it, I remember telling God, like, there's no way I can do this. I'm not strong enough. I just can't, like, I can't do it. And I felt him, like, it almost felt like he was physically holding my hand and walked me through the whole thing. Like, step by step, even when Cyrus was taken, it was the most difficult thing that's ever happened to me. But um, he was right there the whole time. I could just feel such a strong presence. And I felt this, I was just, I've never prayed so much in my life. I could just feel him so close. And my husband and I would just constantly, whenever we were together, we would just pray as much as possible. And, so many people even telling us um, that they lost their homes, they lost their jobs, they lost their marriages, lost everything over fighting for their kids, and still didn't get them back. And it was really hard to see that. And even getting all of the support that we were getting, I felt like we didn't deserve it, or like, how come we're getting all of this, but these other parents didn't, right? So it was almost, in a sense, hard to accept. And I felt bad to feel bad. Like, I felt like I had no place to, I don't know, to feel bad or complain, because all these other people had it like even worse, basically, right? And so I didn't feel like I was validating my emotions, and I really tried to just like, everything's okay, but it was so not okay. And yeah, just so much, I mean, so much prayer. And they told us we couldn't see him that day. I wanted to at least get into breastfeed him, because at this point, I have mastitis. And when I got to the hospital, I was like running a fever really, really high. And
You're
my
already
husband,
sick from before that. You're already
are
not feeling well. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And so now I have the mastitis on top of that. And my husband was like completely sick to stomach. We couldn't eat anything. He threw up at the hospital, like in the bushes, just from being so sick to his stomach. And he actually, we all process emotions in different ways. I remember my husband was just like in absolute shock over the whole thing, and for like that first day, almost didn't say anything. He was just like, just going, but just like couldn't even talk. Um, and me too, in a sense, but yeah, it was really difficult getting past that point. And I remember when we first got married, we talked about how, like, we both agreed that in our marriage, no matter what happens, anything that comes against us, it's not going to come against us individually. It's us together. So like, it's always us against the world, or us against the issue, but never us against each other. And from hearing these people, their stories and how they lost their marriages, and it's just, you lose everything basically. And so we had that conversation that, like, we're in this fight together no matter what happens. I know the justice system, they try to pin the parents against each other. And we were just like, we're totally strong. We're gonna be like brick walls. Nothing could get in between us. Like, we're just gonna fight as hard as we could. Even looking towards the future, like, no matter what it takes, we're gonna do everything we can. I'm sure we'll lose everything, but that's okay. We're gonna get our son back. So
Wow.
um we decided that we prayed. I mean, constantly just praying together as much as possible. It was the
Mhm.
only thing we could do. Um, and I kept asking them. My husband called in was like demanding that they let me in to nurse. He's like, Cyrus needs to nurse. She has mastitis. Like, let her in at least to nurse. Even if you're not going to give him back, just like let her in. And they wouldn't let me in at all. And they later said that there was a meeting with the hospital staff, the local police agencies, um, and I think even some of the political leaders. They had a meeting in the hospital about this whole thing because now it's a huge protest out there. Right? It's like a big deal. Um, and the police told the hospital that they didn't want the hospital to let me in to visit. So the police told them, no, 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 don't let her in. Don't let her in to nurse him. So we found out about that. And at this point, Ammon's out of jail, and both my dad and Ammon, um, they are they have pretty big followings over there in Idaho. So everything that happens, they are keeping the public informed. My dad, I sent you the website. As my dad put all of that up there. Um,
Yep, and we'll put
so
that
he's
link
con-
in the show notes too, in case anyone wants to go and look at that. There are resources on that website that I didn't expect to be. So, in addition to all the videos of everything that happened, there's resources there too.
yes, and there will be more coming as well. But um, so he was updating, like putting blog posts and every little thing that happens. Like they even lost my diaper bag, which had my pump in it. It had like everything that I needed. And they had taken it when I was arrested. They took it in the ambulance and they were saying, oh, we don't know where it's at. We don't know where it's at. When we saw in the medical records later, they noted where it was. They were like, we just had it in the hospital room with Cyrus. But they wouldn't give it to us until my dad like made a stink about it, saying they won't return her diaper bag. And then like an hour later, they called and were like, "Oh, we found it," and then I got it. I got it back. But he was telling them, like putting out for the media that they wouldn't let me into nurse. So they had all these moms, like parents, calling in saying like, "Let her into nurse, let her into nurse Cyrus." I know they're getting thousands and thousands of phone calls just from all over the world. It was absolutely insane. So the hospital calls me and tells me, okay, we'll let you in to nurse him tonight. So I was like, okay, I didn't pump or anything because I knew that after I nursed Cyrus, that I wasn't gonna like make much milk after that. Like I'd have to build my supply back up because I knew, okay, with all the stress and like I haven't nursed in a while, this is like the last milk that's in there.
Mhm.
So I was like saving it up. I didn't pump, and then they tell me, "Oh, never mind, you can't come in tonight." So then maybe you can come in the morning. So I'm like, "Ugh," and I wait until the morning. And they still hadn't given me my diaper bag at this point either, so I don't have my pump. And they kept telling me, "Okay, we'll do it tonight. Okay, we'll do it in the morning," and then never let me in. So I think it wasn't until it was several days in after I think it was after our first um, there's the first hearing I think was on the Tuesday. He was taken on Friday, and the first hearing was Tuesday. So we go on for this hearing, and in this hearing, basically, what they do, there's no evidence that's needed. They call it in like this anti CPS world, they call it the hearsay hearing because it just they can go off hearsay, pretty much anything. And in this hearing, they decide if the court has the authority to rule over this case. So like basically they decide if the court has the authority to even rule on it, like um, if he should even be in custody. So if they decide that they don't have the authority, then the child will be given back. They'd say there's no reason, there's no probable cause, and it's like not even worth looking into, basically.
And how many
Um,
days is this after
I think
he
it
was
was
taken?
I think it was 3 days.
Okay.
3 days afterwards. So because it was over the weekend, which we later found out they often take children on the weekend, so that way um, everything's closed, the courts aren't open the next day, and all of that. But so we go in there and we had attorneys, right? Which typically people don't get attorneys this fast, and they use the court appointed attorneys, which the court appointed attorneys there's no actual like support for the parents. They actually work for, I mean, if they work for, they're on the team with CPS, right? So everything is just very rubber stamped, and they just send everything through to make sure the kids aren't given back to the parents. So, anyways, we go in there and we have our attorneys, which one of the court the ladies that worked in the courtroom, she said she'd been doing this for years, and that was the first time she'd ever seen parents have private representation at that. Because nobody does that; they just use the court-appointed attorneys. So our attorneys were working. I mean, they like slept in their office. So kind, such amazing friends, and they were just working, getting evidence, everything they needed. We were in their office basically all day and all night for some of the nights. And they were preparing for this. So they had all this evidence. My husband testified, I testified, the attorneys testified. Um, and let's see here. They listened to all the information. We're thinking we have the best case. There was absolutely zero evidence for anything, right? We just basically told the whole story. Here's everything. And the judge looked over at her screen and read off her verdict that was clearly pre-chosen because there was no, it didn't, she didn't listen to the evidence and then make a decision. She heard it all and then looked over her screen and read off this long thing that was clearly like a canned response, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And basically said that there was evidence of abuse and neglect because she said because with all the evidence heard that she decided that there was abuse and neglect and that there was all these certain things and that Cyrus needed to stay in their custody like for his safety. So my husband and I were just like we were hopeful at that point, trying to have faith. But now it's like, and I heard that once you get past that, it's so hard to get them back. Like once you get past that first, if you don't get them back then it's just like really bad from there. So my husband and I are just like absolutely bawling our eyes out. And I remember when she was reading off that verdict, I saw the my mind is blanking. I can't remember what they're called. The court guards.
The guardian. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ad litem.
And he was standing there, and I remember he like looked at us and kind of had a shocked face, like because I mean he could hear and see all the evidence as well. But anyways, so we go out there and outside of the courtroom, probably over 100 people. There are people outside of the courtroom protesting, like outside, and then outside the court doors, probably over 100 people. And Ammon was there as well. And I remember like walking out because everybody's just waiting for the news to see like, do we get him back or do we not? And I remember I walked out. We had a family advocate with us who helped us so much. Her name was Sarah, and she's worked with a lot of families that had their kids taken, helps get them back. So I remember she was standing there, doors open, my husband and I walk out, and everyone's eyes looking at us like, what's the verdict, basically? And we were both crying. And I remember I just went up to her and we just like all fell into a huddle crying. And everybody knew. And I think like I just remember I was hugging maybe it was my mom. She like almost fell over. Somebody had to catch her. My mom, she was just so like shaking so hard. And I remember looking over and I saw Ammon's face and he just like shook his head and walked away. Like he was very, very upset. My dad was upset. Everybody was upset. We were all just crying. There was not a dry eye. There were like probably over 100 people in this hall. And it was just like so dark. Everything moved in slow motion at that point. And we had to go over our attorney. It was just in our attorney's office every day, just like figuring out what the next steps were. And let's see here, we went back in, I think the next day or a couple of days later for another hearing. And this is a couple years ago now, so I'm forgetting all the terminology.
That's okay.
But we go in there and we had our naturopathic doctor, he testified for us. And was basically saying he worked with our family for years and that we brought Cyrus in and he's talking about how a lot of people that come into his office, they're not typically the neglectful parents because it's something extra and it's expensive and you have to pay out of pocket. And it's like a lot of commitment to do these health procedures.
Right.
So, yeah.
And in my mind, I'm like, okay, I mean, I'm sure our listeners can track along with this. Like,
Yeah.
there is no diagnosis in the hospital. They couldn't figure it out. You're the one who improved your own son's condition. And then they're telling you, yeah, okay, I'm beside
Yeah.
myself, so I'll just let you keep going.
Yeah. So, and what it ended up being in like the charges, what it was, they were saying there was medical neglect, because I didn't have like well child checks through his whole life, right? We went in the beginning, but then we ended up leaving that pediatrician because they weren't good. So he didn't have well child checks, and I didn't give them my medical records from birth. So they thought that that was sketchy, or they were thinking that we were trying to keep him away from medical people, right? Because I had a natural birth and he wasn't vaccinated and he didn't have the wild child check. So that
So
was one.
could it be that you had a healthy child up
Yeah,
until that
right.
point?
Exactly.
Just
Exactly.
just
So
yeah.
um, they had that in there. And then the main thing was his weight loss. They kept putting in there that, there was all this weight loss, and that due to these calculations, if he lost this much weight, then because they had us, the pediatrician, the one that ended up calling in, uh, they had us tracking how many ounces he was drinking in each bottle. So, which was difficult, but I did it anyways. And they were saying that the ounces don't match with how much he weighed, right? And I'm telling, so they're saying, so basically, like, she has to be lying. But I was saying, no, that's the ounces that he drank, but he also threw it up, everything. He threw it up plus
Mhm.
more. So it's not that we weren't feeding him, right? But they could not get over this idea that we weren't feeding him. Um, and so that was the whole main thing, is that we weren't feeding him. He was so skinny, and also, which he lost a lot of weight, and we were trying everything we could to fix that, but he was just vomiting like so much. I mean, like, for a lot of times, a lot of women in the first trimester, just from growing up a bit, lose a lot of weight super fast. But I mean, like 80 plus times a day, it was a lot. So we ended up, all the details here are kind of a blur for me. I really only remember them for when I have to do interviews. But um, yeah, so I think he was taken on Friday, and then it was by the following, I think Wednesday, they were going to discharge him, because then they said, when he went into the hospital that night he was taken, the nurse in the emergency room, or the doctor, said that he was a perfectly healthy baby with no interventions, and they were going to transfer him to a foster care family. So they were going to take him straight from me and they said he's healthy. So since he's healthy, he doesn't need to be in the hospital. We'll put him with the foster family. But it's like, okay, so if he was healthy, why couldn't he just be with us, right?
Right.
So literally, they were going to take him straight to a foster parent who was there at the hospital waiting. But because of Ammon and his followers and everyone being there, they didn't want to transfer him because they were afraid for the foster mom's safety. Which I'm so glad all those people were there, because that would be absolutely awful. So they kept him in the hospital, and then I think by the Wednesday, he was just doing, like, he was doing well. They had ended up, I think they put the G tube back in, because when he first went in, they said he drank a whole bottle that night. But by the next day, he refused the bottle, and they said that he was calling for his mom. That someone from the hospital called me and told me, we were in contact with the doctors in the hospital, and they called me and said, yeah, he just misses his mama. He really just needs his mama. He needs to nurse, and he's refusing the bottle. So he's gone almost a day without eating now because he wants to nurse. Um, he was exclusively breastfed up until, besides introducing those bit of solids, but he was just used to nursing, right, all the time. So they, let's see here, what point am I at right now? Yeah, he was refusing the bottle. He needed me, and so they called us and told us that they were going to have to put in the NG tube, because he'd been like a day without eating it. He was losing weight again. So they put in the NG tube. They also gave him formula without my permission. But then brought in some pumped breast milk for them to use. I don't know if they used it, but yeah, that made me really upset. So he was in there, and then he had gotten over his episode, which I told him, okay, he's going to be over the episode by this day. We've had enough of these now that I know the patterns. So he's in there, and they said, okay, now he's completely well, so we have to discharge him. The hospital had to discharge him, but they were afraid of the transfer, because, by the way, every day there's still people at the hospital. Every single day, hundreds of people still protesting from, like, sun up to sundown, basically. And so the hospital's like, we need to get rid of him, basically. And they ended up, they decided to take him to the office, the social services office, CPS's office downtown, which was pretty close to the hospital. And they had a whole, we found out later what happened. Um, they had a whole, like, basically all these police officers and escorts to escort him um, to the social services building because there were just a lot of people out there. But they did this at the exact same time that we were having one of our hearings. So, and everybody, Ammon and my dad were sending everybody to the courthouse, like everybody being in front of the courthouse, basically protesting. So they were going to take advantage of that time where everybody was distracted to get him out. But we're driving in the truck, my husband and I, and my sister in the back. And we're on our way to our court hearing when my sister gets a call. Somebody got her number, and it was a lady that said, "Hey," she didn't say her name, but she said that she worked in the sheriff, I believe the sheriff's office, and she said, "I support you guys, but I just want to let you know I overheard um, one of the lead detectives or something like that. I overheard them saying they're getting together like a bunch of escort vehicles to transfer Cyrus to foster parents." And I'm like freaking out, like, oh, they're doing this, they're gonna do a transfer today. So my sister was like, "Thanks for telling us." We immediately got the information out and sent a bunch of people back to the hospital. So at this point, it was insane. It's like a movie. Um, there were people in the ambulance bay. There were people all over it, and then maybe like a dozen different vehicles that were any ambulance that went out or transferred. Or they were following them to see where they went, and there were people like driving in circles around. Like it was just like a whole thing. They're trying to like either keep him there or just not get him to this foster family. Um, so they ended up later. We found out this is it, the reason why they did this is crazy, but they did a lockdown in the hospital for like 2 hours, and it made like the news and everything since they did that. But they ended up because of that reason they didn't give him to the foster parents and instead took him to the CPS office. And we later found out that they took him underground. There's downtown in that area. There's underground tunnels downtown, which I think is kind of sketchy, but it transfers from the Idaho State Capitol building to all the different. There's like a lot of different offices, right? Like different hospital offices and just I don't know all the bureaucratic organizations. They all connect underground with underground.
Sketchy is an understatement.
Sketchy is a very big understatement, but he went through the tunnels. He went through the tunnels they took him through to get him to the CPS offices. So he got there to the offices, and when we found that out, I was upset that he had left the hospital, also, and that he wasn't with us. But I felt better that he wasn't with foster parents. And then I'm thinking though too, like if he's just here with all these social workers, what are they going to do to him? Like I'm just so concerned and stressed out. And I had multiple people message me telling me there were nurses in the hospital and they went in to check on him or they spent time with him, but he had just been left. They left him there. Nobody was watching him. And one of the nurses told me that she found him, sent me a message and told me that she found him like in his own vomit because nobody was in there watching. And then the medical records show one of the nurses marked in there that when she went in the room and checked on him, he was laying in his own vomit and she had to clean him up because they just left him. And like what I was trying to tell them is when he has these episodes, he's vomiting so much, he has to be held up right. He needs to be cleaned up after every time. And like, you gotta, like, we know how to do this, right? Because I'm his mom, of course, but no one's taking care of him. So when they finally let us in for our first visit, which backtracking again, it's hard to like keep the storyline, but I think it was the day before they had taken him out of the hospital. They let us do a visit, our first visit, and there were 7 police officers and like 2 or 3 hospital guards that went with us that walked us up to the hospital room. We only got like an hour visit with him, and they were all in the room watching and just like right there. And we're just trying to spend time with him. I'm nursing him, but they just like see us as this huge threat. Um, and when we saw him, I could see he has acid burns all over his cheeks from where he was laying in his own vomit. And he has sensitive skin, so that happens really fast. And I know that happens. You got to clean him up, right? But he was just in horrible conditions. He looked so much worse than he was when they had taken him. So that made me really upset. But back to him being in the CPS offices, we were going to go in for another visit. And I remember I'm just like, I can't sleep at night. I'm like, wrestling. And I remember praying to God, like asking him to somehow give me peace that Cyrus would be okay in those offices. And I remember asking God, just like show me somehow, because even if we get him back, like I'll never know what happened to him while he was away. And I just prayed somehow that the Lord would give me peace, that he was okay. Like I wanted to know that he would have been okay in there. And we went in for a visit, and there's a gentleman who's actually the governor's bodyguard, and the governor in Idaho is pretty corrupt and was not too fond of our family. But we know his bodyguard, and he was friends with our family, always very nice to us, and like I have his phone number, and we've seen him very often at different events at the Capitol. So we go in for this visit, and there's security guards, police officers, all that are in for this visit in the CPS office. They took us to the elevator to have us escorted up to the room where he was in. And when the elevator doors open, I see this man who's the governor's bodyguard. And when I saw him, he told me that he had come over from the Capitol building, because they're pretty much right next to each other. And he said he had come over from the Capitol building to watch over Cyrus, and just make sure he was okay. And I just immediately at that point felt peace, and I knew that was the Lord giving that to me. And I knew that he would be okay. So that was just like, all along, if we talked all day, I couldn't even cover all the little tiny and huge miracles that happened throughout, those 7 days, just so many miracles. But yeah, I completely felt peace. They let us have a visit with him. And then I think we were supposed to go in again for a visit the next day. And there's so much stuff happening behind the scenes, like politically, and just a lot going on that I won't even have time to get into. But I know that there were also the first day, and all those protesters that showed up, there were the lieutenant governor was there speaking, and there were, I think, 8 or 9 different local legislators. They were all like demanding that Cyrus be returned. So there was a lot of there was political support, but then also, it was a lot of drama going on.
Yeah.
But there was a lot going on behind the scenes, even with our attorneys. And by the way, both my dad and Anna, I know my dad specifically, through the whole COVID thing, this hospital that everything originated at, they had done some really bad COVID protocols, and with the ventilators and just all that stuff. And so my dad had written multiple articles exposing the hospital. So they already know who he is, and it's like an enemy of theirs, right? So he's now finding out more about what they're doing and their protocols, and he's just posting more and more and more. And him and Ammon are speaking up and just everything, exposing the hospital, right? So there was just a lot of political stuff involved. But they finally, let's see here, it was I think day 6 or 7, where they had us go in for another visit, and they had us sign. Let's see, what was it? They said that they could give him back to us. He would still be in state custody, but we could have him physically, and we had to sign this paperwork, which we didn't want to do, but we're like, if we can get him, whatever.
Yeah.
That's
Whatever you need to do. Right.
That's how they tie parents into this stuff. And a lot of times that these papers have manipulative language that really puts it makes the parents admit fault before bringing them back home. But we had our attorneys with us, and we made sure they got everything, in that paper to look good. So they gave him back. They literally, I remember, we were just there for a visit. We didn't think we were going to get him back. But as soon as the papers were signed, they, the social workers had his stuff in bags and were like, here, like basically like take him kind of thing, like get him out of here because it was just like, of course, a lot of trouble for them at this point. I mean, again, protesters in front of their building and everything, just everywhere. So we got him back. My husband and I were in total shock. Like we didn't believe that
Yeah.
this happened. We were just like silent. And and our attorneys, they took us out the back door because there were a lot of people out in the front. And they were like, I know you probably don't want all that chaos right now. But when one of the police officers walked us out, he pulled us to the side and he was like, hey, um, I have a family, I have kids, and this is like really wrong. It should have never happened. You guys, I'm really sorry. And like, we're praying for you. And he gave us both, we had multiple, like
Mm.
at least half a dozen police officers throughout who were like complicit, but like, I'm so sorry. You know what I mean? So, it was kind of hard to watch because it's like, how could so many people like just not stand up, right? Like they all just go along with it. But at the same time, I'm glad at least they weren't agreeing with it, right? But that's the problem is that even if the individual officers don't agree with what's happening, they're always going to follow orders. And no matter if they're good people, good parents, good family, if they're good or bad, it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, if your child is going to be taken into CPS custody and if the state's going to take your child, it's not going to be the governor or politicians or the people that let these laws be in place. The ones that show up at your door with guns they're going to be police officers, even if they don't totally agree with it. Those are the people that do it, unfortunately. So they a lot of times come with social workers, but yeah, it
That's
was
I kept hearing the word, like, as you're describing this, it's like they're puppets. They're just
yeah,
puppets, and there's such a larger, um,
yeah,
organized thing going on here. Yeah.
yep. And we were talking about my husband and I were talking about the fact that like when you have the government involved and the state is after you, it's so difficult because like we were saying, it would be so much easier if if our son was kidnapped by street criminals. Because then you can get all the support in the world. You'd have the police support and you can like just go after them yourselves and just make things work. But when it's literally the state, it's the government, it's police, you have no defense, right? Because then even if you do try to do something, well, now you're in prison for the rest of your life, right? So it's just it's like an organized criminal operation. And we later found out, there's information. A lot of this information is on the website, so I'll let a lot of the listeners like go there to look into it because it's just so much to talk about.
Mhm.
But we since found out that there was a law that was put into place, I believe, in 1997 by Bill and Hillary Clinton, and this law takes funding from the Social Security Administration to the states for taking children. So before it was like if a child needed to be taken in an abusive situation, the state had to pay for that whole process, for the foster parents, for everything. The state had to pay for it, but when there's an abusive situation, it is what you need to do, right?
Mhm.
So it was kind of just the more necessary um, cases where the children were taken, right? And I'm sure there were plenty of times where kids needed to be taken and they weren't taken, and I'm sure there was all that bureaucracy going on and corruption then as well. But then when the federal government introduced the opportunity for states to be paid to take children, then what happens now, they're financially incentivized and they get paid. The calculations we found out come to around, on average, $1.2 million per child. That's what they're worth to the state if they can make it all the way out to adoption. So a lot of people have said that there's states that can't even balance their budget without CPS taking children. So they literally get paid from the federal government to take these kids. And since then, the amount of kids taken has completely skyrocketed, and they have lost. The foster care system has lost tens of thousands of children with no trace of where they've gone to. Foster parents are allowed to be convicted sex offenders. And another one of the stats is that these are the stats from Child Protective Services themselves, which I'm sure it's even worse than this. But they say that of all the children that are taken, 83% of the time, the causes are unfounded. So it's like you get it wrong at least 83% of the time, but they're still fully in operation. And they lose tens of thousands of these kids in foster care. And they're just gone. So all this stuff, we're finding out this information throughout it, right? So it's just what it is just a government run, government subsidized child trafficking operation,
It's
literally.
incredibly sinister. And as I was preparing for this episode, the documentary that's there, I think I said this, I couldn't even finish it because it was so dark and I was not in a place where
Yeah.
I was able to finish it. But we will link that as well. And just the episode, or sorry, not the episode, but the website with the story and the videos and everything. We'll link that as well. I want to know, so you get Cyrus back. What is that? How is he when you first get him back?
So
Like you said he's in a worse condition than when he left you, but tell me about that moment.
yeah. So when we got so when we got him back, he was so much worse. So much worse than when they had taken him. And at this point, because before it was like, okay, we could figure out that he got constipated, then he would start throwing up, and then we could always like fix it. And he would usually gain all the weight in between and then have another episode. So it was like managed, but we were still super concerned and trying to figure out the cause. But when he came back, he started vomiting for like at least 5 to 7 days. And then there would only be like a 3 day break in between, and then 5 to 7 days again. And it was so severe. And he also wasn't constipated anymore. He would also sometimes, it would be like the opposite. So we couldn't figure out, there was no enemas to be done. He was just like sick constantly all the time. I mean, like at least 20 days out of a 30-day month, he was sick and like had no life. Um, but we had, when he got out, because of, word had gone out about what happened, there was probably like a dozen doctors who had reached out to us saying, hey, it could be this, it could be that, or like, I'm willing to work with you. So he worked with several doctors who checked him. Some of them did some testing. He started chiropractic care. But then we had to be careful because he was still in CPS custody. So they only let us do certain things. And we had to like tell them. We were in like a group text with the social workers, and we had to tell them, tell the case managers, here's what's happening. Here's what he's doing. We had to ask them. And then we wanted to do some, we wanted him to do something, sessions in the hyperbaric chamber, but the social workers didn't let us. And that was supposed to really help with the condition he had. So it was just like our hands were tied and we're trying. Um, and then we had to log every feed, tell them here's how much he ate, here's how much he pooped, here's how much he weighs, like every day, right? And if it didn't line up, basically, like if they could see that we're feeding him this much, but his weight is this much, if something didn't line up, then they'd have us come back in. So they told us these are the rules. If you want to keep him in, like, physically, you have to follow all these things. So and we would have to go into this, I think it was like 6 weeks this was going on for. We would have to go into the social services office, and they would do weigh-ins and go over like our case plan to make sure we were following everything. And they told us, like, just so you know, we're the third parent. So just as you would like inform each other on doctor's appointments and like things, and like we're the third parent. And they were always talking about how they were the third parent. And I remember even too, like whenever we'd have visits, the case managers, the one case manager and her assistant, sometimes they would just like take Cyrus from me. Like if he was doing something cute, you're like, oh my gosh, he's so cute, and just like grab him. And then I would like grab him back. But it just was so disrespectful, and they really saw themselves like there was no respect for us as parents. And so one of the times his weight had gone low. His weight had gone lower because he was vomiting again. But then he had gotten better. He was on the last day, and I'm telling them, okay, he's on the last day, he's better now. And they were like, oh, are you feeding him enough? Are you feeding him enough? And then they were like, you're gonna have to come into the ER. So we go into the ER. We had to meet them there. And at this point, he had gotten better. Like I told him he did. So he's just playing around, and he's drinking his bottle and crawling around. And the ER doctor came in and was like, well, why'd you bring him in? And so I just pointed to the social workers, and I was like, they made us, right? Like that's the only reason why. And they weighed him, and he was above the weight that he was before. And they did a test as well. And I remember the case manager, she was like, well, is he dehydrated? Like she wanted him to be. And he was like, nope, he's clinically hydrated. Like he's looking good. And they were like bummed. They had this face that they were like, expecting for him to be underweight or dehydrated, but his weight was
And
the highest it's been. Right.
is this the same hospital?
No, so we actually went to another hospital because
Okay.
we were like, we're not going to go to that one again.
Right.
And yeah, they were all very nice at this hospital. And of course, now at this point, everybody knows. Everybody knows in this city what's going on, especially the hospitals. So they were really nice. And the hospital we were in, actually, the ER doctor was friends with um, somebody who was friends with our attorneys. So they all like got in contact with each other. And I remember him, like the ER doctor knew the story, and apparently he later had called our friend to talk about it. So in that hospital, everyone was very nice to us, and they got us set up with a GI doctor, which I was fine with because I was like, if he needs to look at do all that, that would be great. We'll take any information we can get at this point. And the GI doctor also, he happened to be friends with our attorneys as well, and he was very very nice, and completely straightforward. Just told us what was going on. He told the social workers from all the tests he did. He said, this is nothing to, he was the one that got the diagnosis for cyclic vomiting syndrome. He got that for us. And he told him this has absolutely nothing to do with food input or with, not eating enough, anything like that. It's completely separate. It has nothing to do with that. And it's no fault from the parents. There's nothing the parents could have done basically to cause it. There's nothing they did or even didn't do to cause it, right? So he told them that. Of course, the case is still ongoing, and this doctor and another doctor we were working with, like 3 or 4 doctors, filed paperwork, sent it to the courts, basically showing them that like this wasn't the parents' fault. So eventually, after it was like 6 weeks, I think, and at this point, because my family was all supposed to be moving to Florida, and they had ended up, we stayed, of course, when Cyrus was taken, everybody stayed, and we were all just like sleeping on air mattresses in my parents' house because we didn't want to go back to our house without Cyrus. We were all like staying together with my parents. And it was just like moving boxes and air mattresses. And we're just like, and then, the house they weren't supposed to have for that long because they were moving. Right. So when they finally had to move out of the house, it was my mom and some of my siblings over here to Florida with the moving trucks. And then my dad and sister stayed with me up there in our house. And for a little while, we all stayed in our little 3-bedroom house, like 13 of us. And my family just never left. They never left our side. My dad was like, I won't leave the state or anything until he's given back, until the case is dismissed. And he just basically, his entire business, all of his business plans, his moving plans, everything completely derailed, and just completely focused on this for the entire time that it was going on. He lost a lot. My husband and I, our business that we had been building up for 3 years, that was the first really good year that we had. And we were so excited that it finally like made it, the business, right? We lost all of that, lost absolutely everything. Of course, it was the least of our problems, but still, it was a lot. But the case was dismissed, and he was about 6 weeks later. And then maybe about 3 to 5 days later, we just packed up our whole place and left. My dad and my sister flew with me and Cyrus over here to Florida, where my husband loaded up just his truck, no moving truck or anything, just his truck. We got rid of literally everything and just brought like clothes and essentials in the back of his truck and came here to Florida. We ended up staying with my parents for a few months. We came here, like, my husband had no job, our business was gone, we owned nothing, and Cyrus was still so sick. But we came here just with like sick kid, having nothing. We were living with my parents, and just trying to figure out, okay, I was like, now he's in our custody, and this is our job now. We're going to figure out what's wrong with him. So we like basically split up. Levi was like, I'm going to get to work immediately. He just got any job he could find here, and started working really hard, really long hours. And I was like, I'll do everything to figure out what's wrong with him. So I spent a lot of nights up till like 6 a.m. I mean, I was researching his condition, cyclic vomiting syndrome. I read books on it. I read medical studies on it. I just anything I could find. And then we found a holistic doctor here that we went. He did stool tests, gut tests, all this stuff. And it's funny because in the hospitals, they're like, every test is so normal. It's like, one of the doctors even said he's like one of the healthiest kids I've seen on the tests, right? But then we go to this holistic doctor that actually tests for the right stuff, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, she's like so messed up." He actually said that one of the tests he sent to the lab, that a lab technician called and was like, "Hey, but what's going on with this case? Because I've never seen a gut so destroyed on a child that age. Like it's insane." And he was like concerned about it, so called to talk to the doctor. But in this testing, that he also found that he got C. diff, which he contracted in the hospital.
Mm.
It's a really bad colon infection, but also explains why he had like diarrhea and so sick when we got him back. Um, so he got that in there. Of course, it made him worse, and we decided not to go the antibiotics route. We did a natural route. Then it was gone within like 4 to 6 weeks, and already he got better after that. But his gut was still so destroyed, so we were doing supplementation and some other treatments. And he was getting like slowly but sure, like steadily better. But the holistic doctor was saying, when it comes to gut things like this, a lot of people are used to like just take a pill, take a medication, and it's gonna like fix everything. But when you're doing healing from the inside, you have to give it time. It's gonna take a lot of time. So we were just being patient with it. He was like slowly, steadily getting better. And then we started chiropractic care with a really good chiropractor. I had actually gone, this is maybe like it was months later after Cyrus was a lot better. We were going to one chiropractor for a little bit. And then I went to doula training. And one of the ladies that I met there had recognized me from the story. And she was a chiropractic assistant, and the chiropractor she worked for had a podcast. So she invited me onto the podcast to do this podcast with him, and then started going to the chiropractor there. And after like a month or so of care with him, Cyrus went down. He would go like 10 days without an episode. And then now these are 1 or 2 days of vomiting. So it's like we're starting to get our life back. He's starting to get his life back kind of thing, because it's not just constant. The first few months, like when we lived with my parents, it seems like a whole blur. I just remember because the only thing that would comfort him was hot baths, and we would have to feed him milk with a syringe, breast milk, or whatever we were giving him. But we'd have to feed him with a syringe. And so I just remember those first few months, I was just it seemed like it was 3 months of being on the bathroom floor all day and all night, just with him in the bath and syringe feeding him. But then we moved out, we got our own place, and he was really doing a lot better, like a lot better. So, through all this research I'm doing, you really kind of have to learn about like everything, like all the health things. I'm on this whole like non-toxic journey, and just like, everything, right? So, I did the doula training because I learned a lot about like pregnancy and birth and all that. And that chiropractor really helps a lot. We're still going to him to this day. So we did that. And after several months, he was just maybe he would vomit like once a month or something. And it was just like in a day, it wasn't episodes. And then we did a parasite cleansing protocol that was like really intensive. And he went like 3 or 4 months without an episode. So it was just like, again, life returned back to normal. And he's he's just getting so much better. I wouldn't say he's 100% healed, but he's more, before he would just vomit no matter what happened. But nowadays he's more triggered. Like if, his aunt gives him too many sweets or something, then he'll just like throw up once. But there's the episodes and all that. It's behind us. So it's interesting because the things that we did, they would have never allowed or would have been able to do in the hospital or in CPS care, like chiropractic, parasite cleansing, gut healing. They don't do any of that stuff, right? So, that's that story, and so many details that I missed out on. But for anybody that's interested, there's a lot online about it.
Yes.
In that website.
We'll link all of that. And Marissa, I just have to tell you, like, I'm so impressed with everything you were able to do. You just, as a mom, you do the most that you can for your child. And this is all super fierce mom stuff, the researching, everything. You hear it all the time what's the saying? Don't confuse your Google search with my medical degree, but actually, we have access to a lot of the same things, even if it's behind a paywall. And when you have the motivation of having a healthy child, it's night and day.
Yeah.
Um, so the one question that I have to ask is, was there ever any, I think I know the answer, was there ever any repercussions for the physicians, the doctors in the first hospital at St. Luke's?
Yeah. So, I don't think nothing for like they didn't lose their jobs or anything like that. But I know that I mean they were really we used whoever anybody that was putting information out used their names. So they had I guess like social repercussions. I know
Sure.
the first doctor, the one that said that he was a perfectly healthy child with no interventions. Um, she was like honestly turned out to be pretty evil. But she, I guess, claimed that because of everything that happened, she had to move to like New Zealand or something because of all the social things. And then I believe to the practice that had originally called, they lost so much business. I mean, like so much that I'm pretty sure by now they have actually changed their whole practice name. So there was that too. A lot of it, like the other doctors, I'm sure there was social things they had to deal with, but that we don't know about. Um, but the hospital later, after we moved to Florida, not too long after the case was dismissed, they filed a lawsuit against my dad and Ammon Bundy for defamation because remember I told you they were just releasing all the information on the hospital. And so basically the goal of it, they we were told from people on the inside that heard that they basically just opened up their pocketbook, which by the way, they're funded by the state. So it's really all the taxpayer dollars. But they just like basically had a blank check and told them just like completely take down Diego Rodriguez, which is my dad, Diego and Ammon Bundy, just like silence them basically, right? Um, and at this point, what has happened, I feel like it's a pretty important part of the story because this is what happens a lot of times when you stand up for truth. Um, my dad and Ammon were basically dragged through the mud for years. They're still dealing with it right now for 2 years. And the amount of corruption that happened in this court case, they they didn't they went through the whole trial without Ammon present and without my dad present. Um, he they told him he could come in online like via Zoom because he lives out of state. So he decided to do that. And then when they actually told him you could come in, we'll send you like the information. And then the day of, they refused to allow him to get on via Zoom. And then we later heard in the recording that the judge told the jury, because one of the jury members asked why I don't feel comfortable doing this or being a part of this trial when the defendants aren't here. And she said, "Oh, they had the opportunity to be here but refused." When in
So
fact
much.
she ended so much corruption. And then they had a list of they give you like a list of facts. They give them to the jury, and so they're like, "These are unrefuted facts that we start the case with." And all of them, like probably 90% of them were completely false. So there were facts about Ammon, facts about my dad, facts about the baby. And one of them even said that my dad was like a fact that my dad was worth $10 million or something in net worth. And we're like, oh wow, that's the first we ever heard of that. But so just so much false
Yeah.
information. And the jury awarded St. Luke's Hospital $52 million. So that was the ending of that. And between for my dad and Ammon, what happened was Ammon lost everything, absolutely everything. He lost his house, which was worth about $1.5 million. He lost other properties that he had. He lost his businesses, and in a civil case, you can't have any criminal repercussions. But they, through a lot of corruption and completely illegal doings, issued a warrant for Ammon Bundy and for my dad. For it was was it for? So it basically because there were some payments that they had to make to the court for something completely false, and then they didn't make the payments. So they charged them. They charged them criminally, right? And Ammon had to flee the state, and is as of right now, like basically homeless, and I think staying with family because of this whole thing. So literally just completely lost everything, absolutely everything.
The corruption
Um,
is so deep, and when I was preparing too, I read that, basically, I mean, at the minimum, they broke like 8 laws to in
yeah,
order to take Cyrus. So I could talk about this for a really long time, and I'm sure there are so many different details here, and you guys can go to um, the link in the show notes to read the rest of the detail. There's a lot there, all the blog posts in reverse chronological order, all of that. Um, I do want to wrap up for today just because we know that there is redemption here. And this is sort of the first part of the story. And this is called the Triumphant Birth Podcast for a reason. However, this backstory and everything that has happened to you and your family is just, there's no word that's coming to mind that feels appropriate to put on this situation. So I just want to really, really thank you, Marissa, for being here and being open and for sharing your story, because I'm confident that there are people listening who can gain um, a ton of value from this. And we haven't even gotten into the birth of your twins.
yeah, yeah,
So,
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
absolutely. So, we'll come back on a different episode to talk through the birth of your twins, what led you up to that, any healing that you needed to do in the meantime, and how you're doing now. So,
Awesome.
Marissa, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.